We've reached unprecedented levels of just chaos in the coaching cycle in college football where the season is not over. We have a week left, and there are 9 open Power 4 jobs, which is absolutely insane. And an unintended consequence or result of all of these hiring changes in college football right now is the statement of support. I personally love the statement of support. If you're curious what the statement of support is when an athletic director or university athletic department comes out and they say, we support our head coach and we're not going to fire him. We are not going to fire him. And I have always said that if you have to come out and make an announcement that you're not going to fire your head coach, you're in a really good spot. So today I'd like to talk about the statement of support recipients. Specifically, mainly Mike Norvell at Florida State, because that is the latest one. And the one that I think is the most shocking. But before we get to that, I'm Lucy. I make college football content for a living. And if you subscribe, that would be awesome. It would be cool. It would be helpful. So technically we have 5 statement of supports this season in the Power 4. So the first one was Bill Belichick, which we will not address today because it doesn't really fit the structure of this. That was more of like hot goss getting spread around. We will address that in the offseason, though. I promise you that. I promise you. But the main 4, Baylor with Dave Aranda, Maryland with Mike Locksley, Luke Fickell in Wisconsin, and then most recently Mike Norvell at Florida State. All of these statements of support follow the same sort of guidelines of, hey, we are not having a good season. We have been not having good seasons for a while under this current administration, but we are going to stick with it. And our solution to this problem is to be patient and to invest money into the football program, into NIL. And they've all sort of fallen under that kind of blanket. The only exception is Baylor and Dave Aranda, because right now Baylor has a whole lot of mess happening within their athletics department with their athletic director who had to step down. The whole thing is just... It's a very Baylor situation. So there's that added element, but it still falls under the general idea of things are not going well, but we're going to wait it out. Here's more money. Fix the problem. Real sort of crown jewel, the perfect example of the statement of support has been Mike Norvell. Following a loss at NC State, Florida State let everyone know that Mike Norvell will be returning for the 2026 season. Congrats! This is following a year where Florida State went 2-10 and had possibly what could be considered the biggest collapse from one season to another in college football history, where they went from wrongfully being left out of the playoff, an undefeated regular season, an ACC championship, to a 2-win season. It has gotten slightly better for Florida State. The bar was the floor. They're at 5-6 right now. A win against Florida this weekend, which is possible. That's a game that might mess up the space-time continuum. It's going to be so gross, but a win against Florida would have them bowl eligible, which is very much an improvement from 2-10. But Florida State objectively is still not a great football team. You can look at them and say there's a lot of fundamental issues there, and I don't necessarily know how many more changes can be made that would improve this team, because they already cleared house on their coordinators last season. They hit the portal pretty consistently every single offseason. I just don't necessarily see a step forward for Florida State. And I'm not saying that I see a step forward for the other programs we've mentioned in this video, but Florida State specifically, you're at year 6 of Mike Norvell. He's had 2 winning seasons. He's 38-33 over his tenure. He has not won a road game in years. Like, it is very clear that this is not working. And you can see the fundamental cracks and the issues of losing to NC State on special teams blunders, of continuously missing in the portal, of not really valuing recruiting at the level you should, especially considering that you're located in Florida. You can see that there are significant cracks in the foundation here. So another year of Mike Norvell at Florida State is very much the perfect example of the statement of support, which all statements of support roughly translate to: we don't want to spend the money to fire you right now. We'll wait till the price tag drops. If Florida State were to fire him today, it would be $56 million just to get rid of Mike Norvell alone. His entire staff would be over $70 million to get rid of. that is a pretty expensive price tag. I've heard conflicting things from a bunch of different people, whether Florida State has that money or they don't. Either way, $70 million is quite a lot to spend. And it's important to contextualize where these college football hiring cycles are at right now. $70 million is a lot to spend to get rid of your head coach, but if you know you got the next guy in waiting, if you know you have your top choice, then okay, maybe you'll spend that $70 million if you feel really, really confident in what comes next. But if you look at this market and you see, okay, well, who we want might go to LSU, and who LSU, second option would go to Florida, and maybe the guy we were thinking of would go to Penn State. When there's so much competition, and Florida State is not a bad job, but it's not an LSU level job, you have to say, okay, do we really want to spend this much money? And we know we're not going to get who we want, especially because Florida State has, recently paid another buyout. Willie Taggart was just a few years ago, and that was $20 million. And it's important to add the context that Florida State, financially, when it comes to just TV right deals alone, is not making as much money as a school in the Big Ten or the SEC with the ACC deal that has been signed with ESPN that is truly dog shit, awful, terrible, that we can talk about another day. You can look at this decision that Florida State has made and that all of these schools have made of we don't want to spend this price tag, especially when we look at the market, and justify it and say, okay, that's what it is. But it is interesting to see in modern day college football a program like Florida State basically come out, wave the white flag, and say 2026 is a wash for us. Because even if you are reinvesting money into that program, which I do not think is going to work, especially at Florida State, because you already did that. Post 2-10, Mike Norvell took a pay cut so that money could be reinvested into Florida State athletics, and it really hasn't paid off that much. I will say, once again, 5-6 is better than 2-10, but still. Florida State has just said, this is where we are. We're going to commit to it. We'll see you in 2027. The logic of that makes sense. The risk that you run that, okay, maybe something goes horribly wrong at Alabama next year and that job opens up. Or perhaps Dan Lanning decides to go somewhere different. Now Oregon has opened up. Now all these different jobs have opened up again. Those are all crazy theoreticals. I don't think those things are going to happen. Florida State could get left in the dust a second time because the direction that college football is moving with expectations and an expanded playoff and everyone thinks that they should have a shot to be there, the leash has never been shorter. So when it comes to Florida State's decision specifically with Mike Norvell, it's something that I understand but I don't necessarily support, but I also don't know if I would have a better option in mind because you want to get your top guy, and it's very clear that even though Mike Norvell has gotten the go-ahead for next year, he's not the guy at Florida State. 6 years in, you got 2 winning seasons. I mean, we can do the math there. You are not up to snuff for what Florida State is, and that one, undefeated regular season ACC champ year is clearly looking like that was an anomaly, not the standard. I don't see things improving at all next season. I don't know what coordinators, what quarterbacks, what recruits would want to sign on to a team where you very clearly know there's going to be a change in leadership in just a year's time. So it really is Florida State just saying, yeah, we're out. We'll see you in a few years. At least Clemson's bad too. And I think a small takeaway from this, looking specifically at Florida State, and this is something I'd like to expand on in the offseason on this channel, is athletic departments, athletic directors, we need to work on our reactionary skills. We need to work on emotional regulation. Because the reason that Florida State is in this really crappy contract situation with Mike Norvell that they can't afford to pay out, or they can and they're choosing not to, whatever, is because they jumped the gun at another opening. They jumped the gun not because Florida State was basically a playoff team and had an undefeated regular season. It was because Nick Saban left Alabama, and that is why Mike Norvell got that giant extension. It was not... partially a product of what Florida State did on the field that year. It was entirely reactionary to the fact that they did not want him to leave for that Alabama job, so they gave him a giant extension. One that they did not have enough evidence to give him. We've seen this time and time again with Mel Tucker at Michigan State. When that LSU job opened up, they gave him a giant extension when the only evidence that they had that Mel Tucker was the right guy was Kenneth Walker. That was it. Obviously, that turned out poorly. You are kind of seeing that happen this year with Matt Rule at Nebraska. Since his name was mentioned in that Penn State job, he signed a nice extension with Nebraska despite not having done enough to probably earn that extension. And I understand Dylan Raiola is hurt, but it's been all pretty bad for Nebraska since then, including a blowout loss to Penn State. The way that there needs to be some sort of regulation, whether that's both in rules or systems or whatnot, or just generally emotionally, it would prevent schools from being stuck in this situation the way that Florida State is. At the end of the day, this just all reminds us that whatever job we chose was not the right one. Being a college football coach that's just okay would have been the best. If you like this video, if you want me to talk more college football, especially during the offseason, please like, subscribe, share. That is how I can continue to do this. Please, 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 please. Please. Please.